Hot take. Sometimes athletes can make the best hires. They're disciplined, used to coaching, and have an understanding of calm under pressure. And today's guest on Higher Learning is no exception. I'm excited that we got to talk to Geoff Griffiths, the CEO of Builtvisible, an industry-leading specialist search, content, and digital PR agency. He's also a former professional rugby athlete who played at some of the top clubs in the UK. Today, Geoff and I talk about the importance of building high-performing teams, the secret sauce behind one of the UK's largest independent organic agencies' hiring philosophy, and what the transition from being a pro rugby athlete to a business executive looks like. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I know you're going to too. Can't wait for you to listen to this episode with Geoff. Welcome to another episode of Higher Learning. I am your host, Rashid. Today, we have a very special guest. Today, we are with Geoff Griffiths, CEO at Builtvisible. Geoff, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you, mate. Thanks for ever so much for having me along. Really appreciate it. How are you going?
I'm doing great, man. It is mid-afternoon here. It looks like it's evening out there in the UK. I'm really excited for this podcast. You have such a different and unique journey. I'm so excited to get into it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. It's dark and dingy over here in the UK, but yeah, no, excited to get into it. Yeah, like I said, thanks so much for having me on.
Not in your background, man. Your background's looking really ambient and really nice. So whatever, if it's dark and dingy outside, you've got it going on inside, man. So let's start here. I wanted to learn a little bit. You are a CEO, you're a founder. I want to learn a little bit about Builtvisible. What is this space? How did you get into this space? What is kind of the ultimate vision for Builtvisible?
Yeah, so Builtvisible the way I always describe us, we're an independent specialist digital marketing agency. So we're based in London, HQ there, 70 people, got a global client roster, typically in sort of very high competition verticals. And yeah, we're essentially an SEO data and content agency. So we kind of, love pulling together as a team, sort of really united behind like the power and the possibility of digital. It's kind of such a fast moving space, and particularly anything organic is really, really hard and difficult and requires collaboration, vision, strategy, teamwork to get it done. So yeah, our whole thing is around sort of, creating meaningful connection between people, communities and brands through the things that we do, which is data, SEO and content.
Do you have a specialization in terms of industry or size of company, or is it all across the board?
Yeah, typically anything high competition. So I do a lot of retail, so e-commerce, a lot of travel, financial services, B2B. So this the really hard stuff where, yeah, it's you need to sort of grind out your victories and think a bit differently in order to get leverage on your competitors. So yeah, it's a great space, super fun, always changing. Just absolutely love it.
Yeah, I love it. And listen, if you had kind of a standard story where you went to school for marketing and then, worked for an agency and then decided to open up your own business, I mean, I'd be interested, but not as interested as I am by the actual story because your journey is very unique. And when we were talking, you were a professional rugby player. Is that true?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, for my sins. Yeah, yeah. So in terms of like how that happened, so I was a professional rugby player, and I kind of just didn't really make it. And kind of made the second tier of English rugby over here. So it's not forever money. There's no forever money in rugby. Didn't really make it to the big time, but made it enough that I could be a full-time athlete for a few years. And yeah, just realized I wasn't going to make it at just about the right time, sort of 24, 25. And that's when I began my kind of transition into sport, into digital marketing. Just a thing that I sort of found a bit of a passion for. And yeah, sort of fast forward 12 or so years, and I've joined Builtvisible, bought the founder out. And yeah, we're kind of going from strength to strength. So it was a bit of a
Yeah, I'm not gonna let you gloss over that journey that quickly. We're gonna dive deeper into that. I want to learn more. So I want to ask you this first. I'm reading this book called Range, okay, and it's kind of a counter to Malcolm Gladwell's idea of 10,000 hours of specialization. So they're used in the book. They talk about Tiger Woods, right, and how he was obsessed singularly with golf and did everything around golf to the point where he became the world's greatest golfer, right? And then they talked about Roger Federer, who had a very different background. His parents were actually in tennis, in coaching, but they never pushed him to specialize in that sport. And in fact, he excelled at basketball and soccer and across the board, a bunch of different sports. So I'm interested for you. Were you a multidiscipline athlete growing up, or were you focused on rugby from the beginning as you kind of grew and ascended into the professional career?
I think it's important to make sure that I'm not compared with Tiger Woods or Roger Federer in terms of my abilities. But I think, no, I was sort of a multidiscipline athlete growing up. So I was kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none, really, when it came to sports. Kind of ended my rugby career was a bit like that as well. I was very flexible, could play multiple positions. But I'm a massive believer in I guess the point of the book will be range, right? In terms of having a bit of a breadth. Not only that, it's kind of, I've got a real passion for working with athletes that are still in sport, looking to transition out in terms of, the more rounded and holistic you kind of approach life. Ironically, the less you focus on the thing you think you're trying to perform in, sometimes the better you're going to be at that thing. So, developing more rounded sort of human beings than just athletes that hammer the same thing all the time, can sort of really pull, really bring more sporting performance out, and it obviously sets you up for later life as well. So I'm definitely in that same school, I reckon, of range and breadth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that is the book talks about how when there's something like chess or golf that is kind of a singular endeavor and you can kind of control the math of it or the formulations or computations of it, that's one thing. But when you get into anything that has, changing variables at any given time and you have to be able to be adaptive to that, that's where that kind of linear focus doesn't work as well, and we're having kind of a wider breadth makes sense. And so I ask you this because as a professional athlete, I have to imagine there's many things that in that role that have led you to be successful professionally. I'm just interested, what synergies have you seen there? What are some things that being a professional athlete has translated and made you a better leader, better founder, CEO?
Yeah, I think without getting too cliched about it, like there's lots of cliches, like people love kind of, goal orientated and all that kind of stuff. But I think for me specifically, everything for me really comes down to self-awareness. I think that is any high performing individual actually understands themselves and understands why their performance is good, why it's bad, what they need to do, how accountable they are. And it's interesting, like coming out of sport and moving into business is like the lack of self-awareness in a lot of people is quite astonishing in comparison to in sport. If you have lots of self-awareness in sport, you'd often not have a lot of ego. You're honest with yourself. You're not kidding yourself. You don't take yourself too seriously. You understand, particularly in a team sport like rugby, that you can't do anything on your own, whereas if you don't have that self-awareness, it's all you. You're the man, etc., etc. So I think everything comes down to that, and I think there's loads of stuff within that in terms of running a business. Is you take feedback for what it is. For example, like it's not a personal attack on you. It's just okay. That's information. It's data I can use, and I think as an athlete, as you get given that we'd play on a Saturday, Monday morning, straight in video session. You're just tearing your game apart to get better the next week on that cycle. So yeah, I think loads of that kind of stuff, and also resilience. Like you never have a sporting career where nothing goes wrong. And I think in business, how you deal with pressure, setbacks, it does breed a bit, it does breed resilience as well. So I guess they're kind of cliche things as well. But they're the things I kind of think, certainly those stand out in terms of what I've taken and why I think that's valuable in a business like ours, in a people business.
Yeah, I love that. And so listen, I'm going to jump a little bit to hiring right now because I want to ask a question. Self-awareness is something, feedback is really big in our organization and our culture. So that's something that we definitely share there. Resilience is absolutely something that we talk a lot about in our organization in terms of overcoming adversity. But I really want to point in on the self-awareness. When you're interviewing people, do you have any questions or do you have anything that comes to mind that you can kind of try to identify their self-awareness? Is it just kind of keeping track of cues or anything that you do to try to determine somebody's level of self-awareness when you're interviewing them?
You know what? It's just simple things. Like if somebody doesn't know the answer to something, like they're not trying to bluff their way through and they'll just tell you. Because if you've got the right level of self-awareness, and this is just one example, like if you've got the right amount of self-awareness, you'll know that the interview probably won't ride or die on that one question, right? It's about how you approach everything. So yeah, always trying to look for it. I don't think you see a lot of ego. You see people that understand they're going to be entering an organization and that they're going to be, a key player, but it's not just about them. And they kind of understand the bigger picture. I think there's questions and kind of techniques that can draw that kind of stuff out. I think's super, super valuable. And that, it's just a bit of vulnerability, isn't it? If you don't know something, say it. It also, flip side, if you think you're particularly good at something, like just say it and say it in a way that isn't arrogant, just shows that you understand yourself. Because it's just this huge asset that it's just a surprising amount of people I don't think have a massive high level of it.
You're right. Like, I mean, somebody who really lacks self-awareness, within a few minutes of meeting them, there's just like little cues there. I'm going to give a little bit of a tip here and a little bit of secret sauce because I really look for self-awareness, and there's a question that I love to ask, and I'm not going to take credit for this. I want to tell you how this came about. So Danny Mayer, famous restaurateur, he talks about something called enlightened hospitality. So whenever you go to one of his restaurants, the way they remember you, the way they take care of conflict and issues, the way that they, make you feel at home is renowned across all restaurants. It's incredible, incredible, incredible. And so I actually wanted to figure out how do I attribute this into my organization after experiencing it myself. And so I actually reached out to him, and I got in contact with his COO, Richard Corain. And I was talking to Richard around, I want to make people feel that enlightened hospitality experience when they're working with us around recruitment or services, consulting, software, whatever it may be. I think there's a lot of practical things you can take out of that to make a wow experience for customers, because that's really key in any business, but particularly ours. And so we were talking about how they hire, and he said self-awareness. And so I asked him the same question I asked you. I said, well, how do you determine that? Is that you just looking for cues? And he goes, no, I have a favorite question I ask, and it works pretty well. I go, what is it? He said, I asked somebody, what's a common misperception of you, and tell me who the real you is. And I absolutely love it. I used it in an interview today. I use it in all my interviews going forward, because it really does lean into, well, are you aware of what people perceive about you? And can you state it? And then can you tell us what kind of the real you is? So Geoff, let's do it right now. What's a common misperception of you, and what's the real you?
I love it. I think, such a good question. I absolutely love the question.
Steal it, please.
Let me have a think. You put me on the spot. I don't know. I think maybe not as much anymore, but I think certainly when I was still a full-time athlete is I think a perception might have been arrogance, just in terms of how you carry yourself, right? And I think at the time back then, maybe there was a little bit of false confidence, perhaps, which may present itself as arrogance. Whereas now, these days, I just don't really care in terms of other people's perception of me necessarily.
And you have to have a level of confidence to get to that level of sport too. You have to have an iron belief in yourself.
I think there's self-belief, but I think in terms of how people perceive that, maybe in the past, and again, if you're not as confident, you don't have the self-belief, and you look at something that's very different to you, maybe you come across a little bit arrogant.
Yeah, I'll actually answer the question myself. So as I sit here and drink a Celsius, I have a lot of energy, and I'm really passionate about what I do. I think one of my highest qualities is I'm very authentic. But when you first meet me, my personality comes out. I'm an extrovert. I like to be around people. And gosh, if you get me talking about my company and what we do, I'm super excited about it. And I think there's a lot of founders like that, but maybe I take it to a little bit of a higher level. And I think sometimes, and I've really worked on this, I think some people think that I come across as I'm always selling, right? Or that I'm a little bit too polished or a little bit too prepared. I care about relationships. I put time and thought into them. I try to be intentional about it. But I actually think selling, right? The word selling, that's a word that a lot of people run from a stigma. I really am just actually very passionate about what I do, and it comes out in me. And so I think that I've had to learn how to tone that down, because I think when I meet people for the first time, it's oh my gosh, this guy's very excited to talk about everything that's important to him. And as you get to know me better, then you start to see, oh, that's just kind of he's like that about sports. He's like that about his family. He's like that about great food. I'm just a passionate person. I get energetic and excited, and I have opinions on things. So that's a common misperception of me. So listen, we got to put that out on the table, both of us. Definitely use that question. And now if anybody's interviewing at MSH, they're going to know I asked that question, and they're going to use that against me. But that's okay. At least that means they're doing their research, which matters to me. I want to ask you talked a little bit about athletes who are looking to get into the professional world. Maybe they get injured. Maybe they get to a point where they hit a ceiling in their career. How did this become, is this it can be a completely altruistic endeavor, because I'm sure that you want to bring in these types of people into your organization, but how did you get involved with kind of wanting to pursue that channel, and how do you go about specifically sourcing and identifying people in that space, former athletes, that maybe can work for you or maybe help get back into the workforce in general?
You know what? It is actually a completely altruistic. Like it's nothing really to do with Builtvisible. So I just it's just a passion of mine, and I think it's like, you work hard, don't you, to be able to free yourself up to pursue other things as well. And this is a kind of thing that gives me real energy, like outside of the day job. So yeah, honestly, it's just a bit of a passion of mine, and I've got so many ex-colleagues and friends in rugby that I can see them, well, not them necessarily, but lots of people in the sport. Rugby is a very financially unstable environment as well. So like a club has just gone under this week financially. So overnight you got like 40 blokes out of a job. And that happens a lot. And obviously it can happen with injuries. And I just think there's so much potential in these people. Like that's honestly what it is. And like I said, I always say to people, I think I was blessed by mediocrity. Like the fact that I realized I wasn't quite good enough at the age I did and made the conscious decision to move away from the sport, take it a bit less seriously and build a career was like honestly a saving grace, because otherwise I could have carried on till I was like mid-30s chasing a dream that was never going to happen. Whereas I got to take everything I learned in sport about team environments, community performance, and try and apply it to a business. So yeah, it is genuinely a passion project with my sister.
Okay, no, I didn't mean that in a bad way. I didn't realize that you were taking such an endeavor with that. I love that. I do think it's something that's super important. Our company works with veterans that want to get back to work, right? A lot of times when we look at people who've taken sabbaticals or moms coming off of, raising a couple kids and wanting to get back to work, that is one of the most important things you can do is open doors and create channels for people that, let's be honest, sometimes there's going to be generalizations made. Sometimes they're going to say, well, you don't have the skills I need. But we all know that you can train for aptitude. You can't train for attitude. And a lot of the different, being a mother, being in the military, being an athlete, there's a lot of great professional characteristics that come out of all of those things that'll really help you excel in your work, right? So I think that's a really, really important thing. I totally admire that. I want to go back real quickly, and I'm sorry if I'm so fascinated with rugby, but I'm just thinking about it through the context of I love American sports, right? Our football, right? Basketball, baseball. I've been playing these since a kid. I've watched, all the time. I have my favorite teams, all that good stuff. I'm also a big fan of the EPL, right? So I love Liverpool, and I've actually been out to Anfield. I'm interested, is the rugby league similar like that in that you have a bunch of lower division leagues and they kind of start as beer leagues and then you can move your way up into like the top level professional league? Is it the exact same structure?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, think of it like football, but there's just not the money. So like when I was a full-time athlete, for example, like the annual salaries we would get was what the football team, the soccer team in the same city, they were getting paid a week. We would be paid a year. So that's kind of a good measure of like the difference financially in between the sports. But yeah, you can go in at different levels. Top level's fully professional, full time. The second level is a few full time teams, a few part time teams, semi professional, and then below that you go to semi professional, and then it just gets more and more amateur as you go down. So yeah, similar to football, soccer, basically.
Okay, last rugby question. What do you like here in America? Like pickleball is taking off, and ultimate frisbee was something for a little while. Like it's almost like we're just like running out of ideas for sports that we can monetize and turn into big professional leagues. What does rugby need to do to be, more monetized, like more accessible on TV? Like, is there something in the sport, like in its rules, that make it more difficult to translate? Or what do you think? What would you do if you were the commissioner of World Rugby?
Oh God, that's a question. I mean, it's a very inaccessible sport and it's a very elitist sport. So you have lots of people that went to private school. I didn't, but most of the people that play in the top leagues probably had a private education. It's a complicated game. It's funny in the US. So I'm good friends with the USA Sevens coach. So 7-a-side rugby, shortened version of the game. So same pitch, seven aside instead of 15, 7-minute halves, super quick, super fast. And the US have just qualified. Well, I think they're on the way to qualifying for the Olympics, and they did really well last Olympics. So as a gateway, I think that's what can get rugby a little bit more prolific in the US. And equally, you guys do have a professional league in 15s in the full version of the game, which is a great option for a load of guys sort of over here that want a bit of a change of scenery, go and live the life in San Diego or wherever, and play a bit of rugby. So I think it's just it's a bit inaccessible. It's a bit complicated. I know what you Americans are like, is you don't like things that can draw either, and you can draw a rugby match.
Yeah, we're not much for ties. But listen, your football, our soccer has made gigantic leaps over the last 15 to 20 years out here. And I know why. The EPL, right? I know that they started putting it on NBC and US TV over the last 5 to 10 years. Obviously, like the World Cup generates so much interest. That's what happened to me. In 2014, I was watching the World Cup. I enjoyed it. I'm cheering for the US, but I'm noticing all these players on the Belgium team. And I'm like, wow, these guys are really good. We played them. And then I started following, oh, this guy plays in the Bundesliga. This guy plays in the EPL. And I started following it. And then, of course, the FIFA video game, came out. And that was something that was exciting and interesting, too. So I just think that there's wonderful opportunity there. I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me pick your brain on rugby. But really awesome stuff there. And very cool that you were professionally involved. Let's get into the hiring, because outside of, obviously, sports, that is something that I love and something that I know you've done a lot of in your career. So I wanted to ask you, let's start here. When you're interviewing anybody, whether it be for your team or your company overall, do you have an overall hiring philosophy that you try to adhere to in terms of what you're looking for out of a person?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't want to go as grandiose as having a philosophy about it, but like in terms of like what's important to me, I think you just said it a minute ago in terms of like aptitude and attitude is like we do SEO, we do data, we create content for brands. Like you can't go and necessarily get a degree in that. Even if you have a marketing degree, what we do is so specialized that we have to train people to do what we do. And we have various bits and pieces around to do that. So for me, if I'm hiring, especially into senior roles, it's all about the cultural fit that person's gonna add, So, things like we have a phrase here, like we before me. So, it's someone's ability to understand like they're part of something a bit bigger than themselves. Testing for resilience, testing for pressure. Like agencies are high pressure environments. So, someone's ability to contextualize those for what they are and prove that they can handle that is really, really important. And I think for more junior people, which I don't get involved in as much anymore, like again, it's just someone who doesn't have an ego. They're open to new ideas. They're honest with themselves. They're certainly self-starting and entrepreneurial. Is you kind of want those types of people in your business because my job as an owner is to just build a framework to allow people to explore, and bring what they bring to the organization. I can't go and tell everyone what to do, so I need everyone to understand where they fit, what their role is, what their USPs, how they add value, and just explore that framework and make of it whatever they want, but you can't do that unless you kind of have that get up and go, self-starting, bit of entrepreneurialism, bit of willing to try and fail. So yeah, that's a cultural thing, isn't it? That kind of getting the right people in, you're feeding a culture. And so you want people to be able to add something to that culture. So
Yeah, I really love that. One of the biggest compliments I get on our process and what we do is that the first two interviews you go through at MSH are all cultural. Like they're not even asking about your resume, your experience. It's all what motivates you, what's important to you, what are kind of your key behavioral attributes. And then we start to talk about, okay, well, what can you do from a sales perspective, or what can you do from a recruitment perspective, or a software build-out perspective? And so, yeah, it's really, really important, because if you can't even get past those two cultural interviews, then it doesn't matter how great of a salesperson you are. It doesn't matter how technical and amazing you are. And I've had a lot of great feedback from candidates. I've asked them what stands out about our process, and invariably they say that. Let's talk about memorable interviews. Either you've been interviewing somebody or somebody interviewing you. In fact, it could be back when you were doing professional rugby if you want to. What comes to mind when I ask you for a memorable interview experience?
Yeah, it's weird because I haven't had that many, because I've been, I transitioned out of sport. I did a couple of jobs and then I joined Builtvisible at the time. And so I haven't had that many interviews myself. So, but in terms of like, I guess there's one that stands out, which is when I became a full-time rugby player. Is the way that happened is I had an agent and he kind of managed that for me. And the way it would work is you would send footage, right? So you send game tape, to coaches around different leagues and see if they like the look of you. And I remember I basically got hired in a service station, like on a motorway halfway to Plymouth in Devon, sort of in our world, in UK terms, like quite far away from where I live. So we sort of drove 2 hours, sat in a motorway services, grimy, no offense to anyone in Bristol, but service station in Bristol. And just had a bit of a chat with the coach. He'd seen my footage and I sort of left there, didn't know really what to make of it. And then, a few days later, contract offer. And then I went and lived down there for 2 years. And so that's just the shambolic nature of rugby, I think. But that was literally the hiring process, was a bit of game tape, a meeting in a lay-by, and then that was it.
You must have said something that resonated with him. You got the offer, right? So
I mean, I drove. My dad drove me down there. That's how that's how long ago it was, and it was kind of I don't think many people go to job interviews with their parents. Not after they're kind of 16. Looking for a part-time job. So it's probably the most memorable one because I haven't had too many others. But I mean, it's a bit of a weird way to get hired anyway.
for sure, for sure. For anybody, any of our early in career, for any of our early in career talent listening, maybe bring mom and dad to the interview. Maybe that's the way that you get the offer that you're waiting on. What do you have a favorite question that you like to ask in your interviews?
Yeah, again, it's like trying to understand that cultural fit is a big one. So, like one of the ones I really enjoy, you just get such. It's one of them. I think reveals something about a person. But we always ask someone what they would do to organise a social event at Builtvisible. So I love that question because what it does is again, it just gets someone to think about all of the different components of it. And if you're and it's such a broad spectrum because you got to think about when is it, and also the questions they're going to ask you off the back of it. So when's this happening? How much money have I got to spend on it? You've got to work out how can you make it inclusive for everyone, make it super fun. How can it bring everyone together? There's so much scope within it where, and sort of depending on the role, it's like you just get some fascinating questions back. So, and you also just get an understanding of whether someone's going to be any fun or not. I've had some mad answers to that question, which kind of said a lot, but yeah, that's what I like because it just reveals something about someone, and like this beyond the CV. Because everyone has to put you put your hobbies on there, don't you? Or people put sort of outside of work, I enjoy X, Y, Z. It's like what are you going to put on there that's a bit risque? Whereas planning a social can get a bit naughty.
Sure, you're gonna find out a lot about somebody. There's no question about that. I like that. It's a good situational question, but not like how many pizzas have been ordered in the state of Florida, right? And you're really trying to get those situational questions. I'm not a big fan of.
Yeah, it's just what does that tell you about someone? Like it may tell you about all their logic and their reasoning or their understanding of the pizza industry in that state, but like it doesn't really tell you about who they are. So yeah, and also like obviously a big part of running a business is one of my big phrases is like we're not packing parachutes. Like we're not here. It's not life or death. You've got to enjoy what you do as you do it. There's no point in thinking, that when I get this, I'll be happy. When I get this, I'll be happy. It's all ridiculous. You've got to enjoy what you're doing while you do it. And an agency environment, digital agencies are like amazing for having a great time. Sometimes, they have a bit of a bad rep for having too good a time, but that's all a big part of it. And so you want people to buy into that from the off. So yeah, I love that question.
Jackie, do me a favor. On my next trip to London, make sure I visit Builtvisible and Geoff. I just want to make sure. I'll tell them what kind of social event I have in mind. We'll see if I pass the test.
We'll just transfer you a budget and then you just make it happen.
That's I'm all in.
The challenge. Yeah,
as long as we're not partying in Bristol. I want to keep it to North London.
Bristol's a good night out. It's just not that service station. Like, I want to be clear. Yeah.
I love it. So when you miss on somebody that you hired, and we all miss, I'm gonna guess it's gonna go back to the cultural aspect. But is there a theme there? Is there something that you wish you would have done differently, or maybe something that's been kind of a consistent theme when you hire the wrong person that you didn't do X?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the issue with that is that everything's hindsight's 2020, isn't it?
Sure.
You always can see it, see the wood for the trees. I think the danger of it, and I think some of the lessons we've learned previously is like it's not just the hire that's the issue. It's everything that then waterfalls and cascades from that one point. So if you bring someone in at a team level or in any kind of leadership roles, they might be the right thing at the time, and then maybe it evolves over time and goes south. But that is really hard to unpick. It's not just about having to unpick one thing; it's everything else that was associated with it. And so, kind of testing for that, it's just one of those things I think you learn as you go in terms of why did that all go wrong and what was the knock-on and the compound effect of that. Like, how do you get to the source of that? And again, it rarely comes down to how good someone is. Like, it rarely comes down to how good someone's CV is. It's probably the way I'd describe it. Obvious things like have you hiring for people that have done the things you're looking for before, like absolutely. But it's all about like the character. It's all about their approach, their resilience, how they deal with when the pressure does come on, which is inevitable. So yeah, it's a hard one because you always look back and you're like, oh, well, that was a terrible idea, but it wasn't at the time, and you made the decision. So there must have been something in it.
I think it's a really good call out on your part because like you said, when something doesn't work out, your natural instinct is to go back to the beginning and think about what kind of red flag you missed. But you're right; it could be a bad onboarding experience. Could be something changed in their life. It could be they went on the wrong team with the wrong leader. It could be your organization changed, right? And so like the expectations changed. So there's a lot of things when things don't work out that you can attribute it to, not just the hiring process.
I think the way I look at it is like I was talking to someone the other day, and I was like, the thing is, like, we're an independent agency, right? So I own the business. We don't have like a load of shareholders. We don't have private equity. We don't have a group that owns us. It's on us, right? And I think ultimately the way to think about such things is like, essentially it's my fault. That's the way I kind of look at it. And by extension, it's my senior leadership team's fault. And sometimes I think you bring people in and yeah, like ultimately somewhere you won't have given the right brief, you won't have given the right direction, the right strategy, the right support, as well as the individual. I don't think it's ever 100%. And even by hiring someone, making an incorrect hire is like, that's on whoever hired them, right? So it's not like this person's fault, it's on them. I think sometimes, yeah, you got to look at yourself. And again, those learnings have to always come back to the management of the company, the leadership of the company, because they're calling the shots, right?
So you're spot on about that. I tell our managers all the time, especially if they complain about a hire within the first 6 months, right? And something's going wrong, I immediately stop them in their tracks and say, well, hold on. You did one of two things wrong here. Either you hired the wrong person or you're not managing them effectively enough to get the most out of them. So which one is it? Do we got to fix your management or we got to fix your hiring aptitude? Because this isn't on them, right? Especially this early on in the game. And I think that has changed our managers' mindsets on A, being very diligent about who they hire, and then B, looking inward first and figuring out, let me control the things I can control. What am I not doing? Where am I letting things down? And to your point, that floats up to the top. And that's the way I look at it too. Even if something happens bad at the lowest level of the company, I'm always looking about where was my impact here? What could I have done differently? How could I have been more proactive? What was a message I didn't hit hard enough? And I think that's the only way that you continue to grow and get better, not only as a company, but as a leader.
Yeah. There's so many people that you can look at it. There's loads of people on LinkedIn who will sort of, self-flagellate. Oh, I made this mistake. It's like, well, yeah, no one cares really. It's like, I just think it's everything always comes down to a communication, and it comes down to a lack of alignment. And I don't think it's very, very rare in life that someone is 100% to blame for something, is the way I'd probably put it.
Very much not ever the case. There's always a blame pie, and you can always figure out there's a bunch of people, and there's always usually at least a sliver that belongs back at you. So I think that's really good advice and really smart. Let me ask you one more thing on the hiring side. So from a technology perspective, anything you do, like when you're sitting in front of somebody, are you taking notes, handwritten? Are you typing into an applicant tracking system? Are you using a Workday type enterprise tool? How do you kind of like, what's the technology you use to help you hire?
Yeah, so we use an ATS to kind of house everything. The way I'd say, like the bulk of what we have. So we built a thing, again, back to that point around you can't get a degree in what we do, and we have to kind of train people. As we built a career, like our own sort of proprietary career development framework called Career Architect, that helps people plan not just their progression in Builtvisible, but kind of helps them give a stepping stone. Okay, where's your career going? Like, how can we help you get where you want to get to in your career, whether it's with us or with someone else? And so that underpins everything that we do when it comes to hiring, in terms of, the questions are all standardized as well. Everyone's assessed against, competencies, mindsets. And with DEI, like we're huge on DEI as well, in terms of making sure that our applicant base is as diverse as possible. And again, we lean on all of the information in Career Architect to take any personal information out of that process at all, so that we're only ever assessing against the predefined competencies of the business actually requires. So we lean like super heavily on that. It's a little bit clunky. We haven't like quite got it into a technology platform yet. We're looking at migrating ATS, but yeah, we do all of that stuff again because it just makes being fair and having thorough processes, like an achievable thing. Whereas I think there's still a lot of, hiring off network goes on in our world a lot, which, by all means feed those people into the system, but they can't have an advantage in hiring processes in my mind. So yeah, we do a lot to try and combat that really.
I love that. I think it's really important to understand people's development tracks. It's important to understand the skills they need today to get the jobs they want of tomorrow. That's a big way to manage any type of attrition you might have and keep people engaged and focused on their work. I noticed how excited you were talking about that, but you just glossed over the ATS. It doesn't sound like the ATS is exciting you as much. Just entering the data in there, not very fun.
I hate ours, which is the issue. So they'll remain nameless, and I'm trying to move it. But yeah, basically, I just want something that does that does what I want with Career Architect. And the problem was we had the ATS first, then we built Career Architect. Now what we need to look at is we've got Career Architect. How do we get a piece of software and a technology that sits over the top of it and makes it work, brings it to life for us? So
you're not the only one. I've heard more. I've heard more than my fair share of that. All right, awesome. So let's take a little bit of a step back. Let's go back into the world of Builtvisible, your role. So a lot of times I ask people, what's a day in the life like for you in your role as CEO? But I always hear a lot about meetings, and we all got meetings. So here's where I want to take this. When you have a day, when you get home, and you're like, man, I had a really productive day. I'm really happy with how that day went. What typically happened that day?
that's such a nice question. Yeah, because I always struggle with people are like, what do you do? Like specifically, what do you do? It's like, it's hard. I don't know. So I love that framing of the question. I think like for me, it's just I've had a lot of small conversations. I think that's really important for me. So like the way I try and manage, I try and be hands off. I want to empower people. I want to be super clear about where we're going, but how we get there is on them, And so if I've gone to work and I've had over the course of the day, like at least sort of 5 to 8 small conversations, so like groups of 4 to 6 people or just one-to-one, and not just with my team, but across the whole business, that I think is a good day for me. I've got a temperature check on how people are feeling, how they're performing. I'll have had conversations that are about really important things that directionally secure our future or whatever. And I might have been in a sales pitch with a few people. So I think a few small conversations is the way I'd kind of answer that question, because I think that's what it gives you all the spidey senses to make good decisions, and not get detached from what's actually going on the ground.
I love that. I totally agree. Like the relationships, the connections I build with my employees, with our customers. This doesn't happen as often, but still, like the highest adrenaline for me that is the only thing I can replicate to when I was playing sports, not at a professional level, much more in my youth, is going into a pitch, right? And the feeling coming out of that meeting when you did really well or you really hit it out of the park. To me, that's like the business equivalent of winning a tournament or winning a trophy, right? Like I always love that. Now listen, sometimes you find out a few days later, we actually went in a different direction, and that's not a great feeling. But that moment when you first walk out and you've got your team there, and it's like we crushed that, we killed that. I'm constantly chasing that dopamine hit. That's something that I love, and I kind of miss when I was a little more hands-on.
Yeah, I think it's the like when you're an athlete, like you win and lose all the time. So like winning and losing is just an outcome. Like I think there's something to be said for when you're just in the flow, like when you're in a flow state, when you're in the zone.
Yep.
And that's just where, there's like athletes always talk about it, where, time doesn't make any sense. You're just at one with the situation you're in. And I think that's why I'm saying small conversations, because I'm just in them, there's nothing distracting. I'm just giving complete focus. Even speaking to the whole company and doing an all agency, it's like same thing, you just get into a flow state, time becomes irrelevant. You're not thinking about what you're doing, you're just being. I think there's something in that, for sure. And it's like that's what, when you say that, it's like that's what I get from you, is you're just in that flow state.
I totally feel that way. I'm always chasing to get into that flow state where everything slows down, and like you said, you're just integrated with whatever you're doing. Some say that I get into a flow state in the podcast. I'll leave that up to the listeners. I'm not always sure. What are you working on right now that you're super excited about? What gets you out of bed, gets you juiced?
Yeah, so it's good timing actually, because we're just about to launch like a whole new brand proposition. So we've kind of grown organically over 13 years. Founder started it, I bought him out. We've gone through a few sort of phases and evolutions of the company, and we're just about to sort of do something really different in our industry that kind of helps us punch up to the big guys, and just blow everyone else out of the water. So like, I'm super pumped. We've put so much effort into it, and it just, what I love about it is it's a piece of positioning, so how do we sit in the market, what's our messaging, all that kind of stuff. But what it what it really does is really flow through to the team in terms of everyone's understanding of why they're there, what they're there to do, give them the license to go and express themselves, bring their best every day. So yeah, it's like a really holistic piece of work. So yeah, I can't wait. We're having a big party October 18th in London to launch it all. Clients, staff, ex-clients, industry people. So yeah, buzzing for that basically. I mean, there's a fuck ton of work to do before we get it live, but like I'm excited about it. So it's all good.
Damn, Geoff, we should have done this podcast a couple months ago. I might have gotten an invite to this thing. This sounds like it's going to be a hell of a soiree.
I could have given you the budget and you could have organized it. So
that would have been my interview question, right? Then you would have known, is this guy worth talking to? I love that. I'm excited for you. If we want to find out more about that come October 18th or post, we go to your website, or what's the best way to find out?
Yeah, just builtvisible.com. It'll be all over there. I'll be talking about it everywhere on LinkedIn. Yeah, just out there in the industry. Yeah.
Cool, man. There's nothing I love more than talking to founders about something they're excited about, something they're juiced about. It's like when people talk about their kids, and I got 4 of those, so I know how that goes. But man, when there's an initiative or there's been a lot of work put into something and you're getting ready to reveal it to the world, I know this with my software. I'm the same way, man. It's just I get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for the company. All right, couple more questions. Any good books you've been reading lately? Anyone you'd recommend for our listeners?
Yeah, there's one that I found really interesting. It's called Belonging by Owen Eastwood. So it's about it kind of looks at kind of like the fundamental human need to belong. So it kind of looks at how societies sort of pass down sort of stories, senses of belonging, being, and looks at how that applies to kind of high performance in any kind of discipline. So looking at obviously sporting teams, like loads of references to the All Blacks rugby, sort of into business and to other sporting teams, and it's nothing groundbreaking, but he just pulls together this theme and this topic so well and gives you loads of actionable things you can look at that kind of help galvanize a group and help them understand where they've been, where they're going, which in any people business, you'll know, is like, that is what will keep people sticking around. And that's what keep people sort of feeling like they're part of something. So yeah, I recommend it to a lot of people at the moment.
Belonging by, do you know the author's name?
Owen Eastwood. Yeah.
Owen Eastwood.
It's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah. I take book recommendations almost too seriously. Like I almost go and buy them within seconds. So I will definitely be checking that out. That sounds awesome. All right, last question before we wrap up. If you had to offer one bit of advice to a 20-year-old version of yourself, or maybe somebody who's listening who's early in their career, something you know now but you didn't know then, what would that be?
Myself, I'd say don't play rugby because you'll avoid a lot of surgery. But no, I think I think I say this to quite a lot of people. Like, I just think the sooner you realize that everyone else is making it up, like everything's better. Like the world is a nicer place. Everything's fine. There's a lot of people that are just making it up. We're all making it up as we go along. Like it's rare that, especially doing what we do is like maybe, yeah, we might have owned I haven't, but say someone's owned a business a couple of times before, they're still making it up when they start a new business. That's part of the fun. And I think, a lot of young people, they think there's a way of doing things and they think that they've got to kind of either fit in or they've got to toe the line or they've got to, they feel frustrated, can't change what's around them. But the reality is they can, because there's no formula. And I kind of wish someone had said that to me when I was younger. I was still kind of towing the line. I mean, I won't play rugby, which was great. But even then, I could have done loads while I was playing rugby, or, I didn't have to fit into that. So yeah, I say to everyone, like everyone's making it up. When you drop the ego and realize that, it's like everything's lovely, basically.
One thing we say here at MSH that's a big cultural tenet of ours is that we take our work seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. And I think one of the biggest motivating factors is when you realize that these people who are well off or wealthy or invented and created and done all these amazing things are not that dissimilar from you. In fact, they're quite a lot like you. And in some cases, maybe don't have the same advantages or maybe even more ignorant in certain ways than you are. So 100% you're right. And that can be, if once we drop those shackles and realize that, then the world becomes your oyster, right? And it's something that you can pursue with confidence, because at the end of the day, confidence is so key. And you know what? It's not like we're packing parachutes out here. So you always got to remember that too, right?
Exactly. 100%. 100%. Yeah, I love it.
Geoff, I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time with me. I promise you, when I come to London next time, probably to watch a football game, we're going to get a pint and maybe a whiskey if you don't mind taking me out.
100%. We're going to watch a rugby game as well. I'll talk you through it.
Totally in. All right, man. I appreciate you being on. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I've loved it. Cheers, Oz.
Good job.
Thank you for listening to Higher Learning with me, Oz Rashid. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.